listening to Unfiltered with Muhammad Uncut, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening. Welcome to the Unfiltered podcast. Unfiltered is the podcast for leaders who involve others, use their influence to help them rise, and inspire them to become better versions of themselves. The Unfiltered podcast showcases leaders who lead from the heart to make a positive change. And this morning, I am blessed to have a colleague of mine, Jeff Ilker, who is a personal leadership and career coach and works with individuals to help develop sustained changes in their behaviors so they can achieve their desired outcomes and impact. Jeff is a firm believer in the principle that the hardest person you will ever have to lead is yourself. So the critical first step in leading others more effectively is to know oneself deeply. Amen to that. Jeff has written extensively on leadership development and is a former classroom teacher and publishing executive at Prentice Hall Pearson Education. He currently co-hosts the education-focused podcast, Getting Unstuck, Educators Leading Change, and is the co-author of Shifting, How School Leaders Can Create a Culture of Change. And he's our unfiltered guest today. Welcome, Jeff, and thank you so much for being our guest today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I love being on the other side of the microphone.
You know, this podcasting business is relatively new to me. I can still count on my two hands the number of podcasts that I've had the pleasure of facilitating. And I say facilitating because this is about engaging the other person virtually on the other end of the Zoom call to just dive into our passions and what we believe leadership is all about. And that's where I'd like us to start today. You're a seasoned leader in leadership, and you talk about it and you believe in it, and it's something that has formed the way that you think, the way you write, and the way that you lead. Can you explain to us, you know, great leaders are not born, they are made. But how do we become great leaders, and why does the world need more great leaders?
Wow, that's a great series of questions. I firmly believe that leadership starts with the self, and that if we're going to lead people, we have to know ourselves deeply first. And my road in getting there was, it turned out to be a good road, but it was a struggle road. And it informed a lot of my beliefs about what leadership should be and what it shouldn't be. I was not a very good leader in my early years. And through the process of working with a leadership coach, I was able to figure out why I was doing what I was doing, and what I could be doing better to lead people better. But it was a long and sometimes painful road.
Painful, but no pain, no gain, as they say. Can I ask you maybe just go a bit deeper? What was that personal struggle, and what was it that you felt you were doing ineffectively and that you are doing better now?
So this goes all the way back to the early years of when I was working in the publishing company. And I was, when I became head of one of the departments, I was head of the social studies department. We were creating textbooks and technology for teachers and school leaders. The work for me was what was important, developing content, good, solid content, because I had been a history teacher in an earlier career and I loved history. So developing the content was what was important to me. And what I didn't see initially, Muhammad, was that the people developing the content was what was important. And I left them out of the equation in the early years. And I was also playing out some tapes from my very early years as a child, where it had been reinforced to me that I had to be perfect in everything that I do. And part of being perfect is that you have to have all the answers. And if you have all the answers, you're not developing your people, because why do I need to develop you? I know everything. And this was so revealing. One of the things that I used to do with people, I would play something called bingo with them, where I had the answer. I knew the answer to the problem, but I'm going to ask you questions until you come up with the same answer that's already in my head. And when you do, it's bingo. Mm-hmm. And this was very frustrating to people, because they could see that I had an answer, but I was going to make them work to come up with the answer that I had, because I had to be perfect. I had to be the one with the answer. So I wasn't really interested in developing people.
And that's scary, isn't it? Being on the other side of that, people were probably walking on eggshells around you, because if they said the wrong thing, no bingo.
Well, it was frustrating, and I think irritating to them. And word obviously got up to management, and I think it was decided that Jeff needed some help as a manager. It wasn't what we were doing content-wise in terms of developing books and everything was fine, because we were working well with the sales organization. We were giving them what they needed. Performance was fine, but my work with people was what was substandard. And so I was given a coach, and what the coach immediately started working with me on was my internal mechanism, the way I thought, and what kind of stories I was playing, and what kind of tapes I was playing, if you will. And that was the start of the journey. It wasn't like in 6 weeks it was over and I was perfect, that everything was fine. It was a struggle. But I think towards the latter part of my career, I was leading in a much different way, where I was asking more open-ended questions, where I wasn't thinking that I had the answer. What I was trying to do was to develop people so that they would do more of the thinking. And there was a much greater vulnerability on my part as a leader. I was willing to say, hey guys, I don't know what we should do here. What do you think we should do here? Right?
And that's incredibly powerful, because most leaders are not willing to admit or embrace that vulnerability, that they don't have the answer, that it's okay not to have the answer, or that they could be wrong. And so your struggle and your journey, and it is a constant work in progress. I don't think that leadership is a final end destination where we wake up and say, hey, I'm here, I've reached leadership, right? It's not a position, and it's not a destination. And I'd even go as far as saying it's not a goal. It's, as you say, it's a process, and it's a work in progress. And I think a lot of us can relate to it. You say that this happened to you many years ago, but a lot of us are still going through this struggle of putting things before people, putting outcomes before relationships, and putting profits before people. And, it's great, as you say, to focus on getting things done, but recognizing that we never get things done on our own, and we don't have to be the ones to get them done. It's about encouraging others to work with us, having the mindset that, get the work done. But if people can get 70% of the work that you could have gotten done, then you're doing okay. Sit back and not necessarily, don't put your feet up, but allow people to grow, allow them to learn, listen to them. And I think, and I'm hearing this from you, is you're going to learn in the process, because whereas, this little boy who was listening to the tapes all the time about being perfect and what that felt like, now you were just okay, showing that you didn't have the answer. You were vulnerable, you were embracing that, and you're saying, I can learn. And what can you teach me? And how powerful that message is to the people that you lead, because empower is a word that we use often, just like leadership. But you enable them, you help them rise, and you get them to the point where they recognize change, that internal mechanism that needs to start with us first, is a process that gets us going. It's an ongoing, and I'd say it converts from a struggle to a challenge and a positive challenge. And I can see that you've embraced it positive, in a positive way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the reasons that leaders struggle here is a lack of trust. And, Brene Brown talks a lot about trust in her early work around vulnerability. Vulnerability and trust have this delicate dance, I call it, that if you can trust people, you can be vulnerable. And if you're vulnerable, you can trust. A lot of leaders don't become vulnerable. They won't allow themselves to become vulnerable because they don't trust those on the other side of the table. They think they'll be taken advantage of. And I think that's really where growth leadership starts, is that you make that stand that you don't have all the answers. And your job is really to help to develop the thinking on the people sitting across from you. That's where
That
growth
trust, I completely agree in that. Trust and vulnerability, leaders, sometimes insecure leaders who don't have the confidence to embrace the vulnerability, are always looking behind their shoulders because they know they're being watched, and they're insecure. They're afraid. They're afraid to make a mistake because they're going to be called out on it, or worse, they won't be called out on it, and then they'll persist in that negative behavior, and they'll erode the trust as opposed to building it. But I think, to your point, when we can say, I don't have the answers, and that's okay. And then you give that over to your team and you say, but do you have the answer? I always say, if we let people weigh in, they will buy in. And there's no greater power than relinquishing your ability to always be right and to give that to someone else to say, teach me. And that is not putting us in a place of weakness. That is actually helping us recognize that we're just as vulnerable as anybody else. And leadership isn't about being right and perfect and good in every single area. Leadership is about recognizing where our subject matter expertise lies and then allowing others to help us grow in areas. So leaders have to be good followers, right? I mean, this is why I'm on this podcast. I'm not here to bring any sort of subject matter expertise myself. I'm here to listen to what you have to say. And you've said a lot. You've written books about this. You talk about the bingo effect, right? But you also talk about the what else, and you encourage people that, the response doesn't always have to be the right response first. So you keep digging and asking open-ended questions because you believe in getting deeper. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's really part of my coaching background. And it's, excuse me, it's, you don't have to be a certified coach to adopt this pattern. But as a leader, what I encourage people to do is to start to ask open-ended questions. And an open-ended question is not a yes or no question that will stop the conversation. It's one that doesn't necessitate having an answer immediately. And when the person responds, as you just pointed out, Mohammed, it's the first response is often not the right answer. It's not the right answer, the best answer. It's merely the thing that first came to mind. And the job of a leader, and the job of a leader who is doing coaching, is really to try to pull back those layers of the onion. And one way you do that is by asking, and what else? And what else? And what else could it be? And to interject in there, I'm not thinking of I don't have an answer here. I'm just curious what else might be at work, so that they don't think that you're leading them down a pathway that you've already thought about.
You're leaning in with them. You're exercising that curiosity, and you're saying, what do you think, right? And this is I'm sure you've heard of the book, The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay-Stanier.
Michael's a friend of mine, yes.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So I read that book about 4 years ago, and it inspired me to think about coaching. Coaching is relatively new to me. I've been doing it informally, and it's been part of my work as a trainer and a facilitator and so forth. But to your point, you don't have to be a certified coach, but you have to have those skills. And you have to know that you don't have to have the answers. And you shouldn't. I think where coaches fail is where they think it's about their voice dominating the conversation and eliciting all the right responses from the subject that they're engaged in conversation with. And what I learned is actually about sitting back, peeling back the layers of that onion, as you say, and asking the open-ended questions so that person can do the introspective search and help surface the feelings that they're having. Because when they leave your call or your office, they need to come to peace and power with the decisions that they're making or unable to make. And they can't do that when you're leading them and answering for them. They can only do it when they learn the skills and have the answers because they've come to that realization themselves. So asking, and what else, and what do you think, and tell me more, that is only helping to peel off one layer, another layer, till they can actually, right?
Right. And the things that, there are a couple things that work against us here. One, when we talk about trust, there's fear involved. That if I show vulnerability, I'm going to look weak. And that I have a fear about that. I don't want to look weak in front of my people. The other thing that works against us, especially in American business, is pace. Everything has to be rapid. We have to do it now. And coaching tends to slow things down. But I'm a firm believer. I grew up, and there was a commercial that used to come on television. It was for motor oil that you would put in your car. And the tagline was, you can get cheaper motor oil, but you can pay me now or you can pay me later. And the idea being that if you buy the cheap motor oil, your engine's going to suffer over time and you're going to pay a lot more. If you buy this motor oil right now, you're going to be better off. Well, the parallel here is if we slow down, we're actually going to truncate the necessity to do rework later, because we will think through things up front. I will have more people performing at their peak up front than as if I simply toss out an idea that they have to fulfill. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Can you go deeper too? You talked about pace, and I want to take you back to trust. Help me out with trust and vulnerability and why that's important in a relationship. It sounds like it should be commonplace. You and I both know the answer, but I'm sure there'll be people on here that maybe don't know the answer, can benefit from your clarification.
Yeah, I just think that when we don't demonstrate vulnerability, it's primarily out of fear. There's something in our past that is even unconsciously having us perform in such a way because we're fearful of being exposed, for not having all the answers. American businesses typically teach leaders directly or indirectly, you're the leader, you're supposed to have the answers, right? So American businesses also don't typically do a whole lot of training for new leaders coming into a role. We're thrown into it as a position as opposed to a behavior. And so we don't necessarily know how to be vulnerable or how to develop our people. And I'm not necessarily going to want to come across as exposing what may be perceived as a weakness to you, because I'm fearful of how I'm going to look to you and how I'm going to look to my superiors. So we have to work to get beyond that. And the way leaders can start here, the way you can show this trust, by you and I talked about this a minute ago, by saying, I don't have all the answers here, but here are 2 or 3 parameters we might want to think about. Now, I haven't given the answer, but I have given a frame where we can start to work around. Or here are 2 or 3 interdependencies we may want to take into consideration. What do you think? So now I've opened the door. I've actually given some context to it and opened the door for their input.
You're given options. And I think as leaders, if we don't have the answers, and that's completely fine, we give options and we open the door and, proverbially leading people to water, but not forcing them to drink, and, asking them to make a decision. How do I drink? How much? And I always think of the biblical story about this, is it Samuel? Leading to, I know it's all right, but he leads his group to water and he watches how they drink, and whether they are bending on one knee and so forth. And I think it's giving people, a good coach or a good leader, someone who will give people the skills and the abilities to know how, or at least the options, and open those doors, but not necessarily force them or tell them. And I think this is, this is what takes us into another question that I had, because there's this whole conundrum between managers and leaders. And, I go on LinkedIn, or I go and I read an article, and it seems that everywhere someone wants to say that a good stereotype or a good role model is a leader. A bad role model is a manager. Well, those two things are very unique. They're very different. They can share certain things, certain qualities, certain approaches to working with others and getting things done. But we shouldn't value one over the other. In your expertise, because you started off by talking about you were focused on getting things done, writing great content. And a manager sometimes focuses on the outcome. How is that different? So can you maybe clarify your understanding of management versus leadership? And
yeah, so I have a definition or I have a philosophy here that many people may not want to ascribe to. I personally think that division of leadership and management is an old one. And I think those two things, formally, if you think of a Venn diagram, we have two circles. We have leadership, we have management. I think those two things need to come and overlap significantly, because I'm a firm believer at leadership at every level. If I'm a principal of a building, I want my teachers to be functioning as the CEO of their classroom. All right. I want them to have that kind of agency, that kind of feeling of responsibility in their classroom, because we don't get anywhere if everybody has to come to me for all the answers, right? I read a very, very eye-opening book a number of years ago, and it changed a lot of my philosophy around leadership. And it was a book by Captain David Marquet, and it's called Turn the Ship Around. He was a submarine captain, and he was trained on a certain type of submarine. In the Navy, there are different classes of submarine. There's the big class, there's the name submarine, but there are different types of submarine. He was trained on the class, we'll call it A. And then all of a sudden, he was reassigned to the Class C submarine. He walked into the submarine, and his first experience, he found that this was a crew that was not used to leading at every level. They were used to taking orders from their superiors. And to make a very long story short, they were taking the submarine out to sea. The captain barked out an order. His executive repeated the order to the helmsman, and nothing happened. And the captain says, why aren't we doing X? And the exec turns to the helmsman and says, why aren't we doing X? And the helmsman goes, because this submarine can't do that.
wow.
And the captain said, why did you tell the helmsman to do that? And the exec goes, because you ordered me to.
Wow.
And so this Captain Marquet is a brilliant book. His philosophy is leader. Leaders are to create other leaders, not leaders creating other followers. He said, I got 153 people on this boat. I can't be making all the decisions. I think that was a watershed for me, because if they can do it in the Navy, which is based on command and control, right? It's military based on command and control. We can darn well look at it in other areas.
When you told that story, it made me remember that leadership is a mindset. When you talk about leadership is at every role, or I want to say every rank, because everyone in an organization, everyone in a household, everyone in a community needs to embrace the ability that they can be a leader in their own right, and in a particular area, in a particular activity, right? When we were kids and we were playing in the schoolyard, we took turns at doing things. right? And maybe some of us excelled more than others. But the idea is that it was a shared activity. We focused on how we got things done as a team, where people brought their strengths, and we started looking at people in the schoolyard who did things better than us and say, hey, how did you do that? And at work, because we cannot embrace this vulnerability, when we say vulnerability, we think negative. We think fear, as you said. We think we're going to be outed. You're saying? Weakness. We think it's the imposter syndrome. Oh, if people only knew that I don't know that. And maybe you do know that, but you feel you don't know it enough. And so we don't have that trust. And just like kids inherently look at each other and say, hey, teach me. How do I do that? And they start liking each other because that's the cool guy. That's the smart girl, because they know how to do it. So we gravitate towards them and we learn. But in the workplace, we put this rank and file, and then all of a sudden the doors aren't open and the communication streams are not fluid. And we need to have people at every level embrace the mindset of leadership. But it's something that I was told, leadership is not only a mindset, but a heart set. It's something that we need to feel in the heart. If we can't truly have others' best interests in mind, then we'll lead with just the mind and get things done. Whereas when we start leading with the heart, we say get things done with others.
Right.
Tell me what, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to react to your use of the word heart. And when we lead from a position of heart, it necessitates us being in agreement in what is it that our organization, whatever if it's a school, if it's a non-for-profit group doing volunteer work, if it's a business organization, we have to have agreement on our purpose. And I don't mean a list of 15 or 20 things on the wall that are a mission and vision statement. I mean a very concise statement of purpose about what it is that we're trying to accomplish here, because then we can expect people to lead from the heart because they have a target in mind. If we don't have agreement on purpose, it's like Alice in Wonderland.
Which is?
Any road will do.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I want to go back to your scenario of the school. And I think this is very fitting for where we are today. As school children are getting ready to go back to school, and we want to think about a heartfelt solution and approach to safety and to leadership. If it was the responsibility of only the principal to ensure the safety of everyone in the school, then I think quickly we're going to find that things are breaking and we're all going to get back into quarantine because we weren't careful enough. But as to your point, if the principal has that single vision of working with others and empowering the teachers to become the CEOs of their classrooms and encouraging the janitors to be the CEOs of keeping things orderly and clean and working with everyone to follow the best practices, and then telling the students, empowering them to be the leaders of how we wash our hands and keep our masks on and how we engage with each other, as opposed to a command and file order. This is how we're going to run our school system. We now empower them with language to say how we want to work together on staying safe. And each one of you is the leader of your own flock, so to say, right? Because one person makes a mistake there, and then the rest of us are infected. So if I carry that responsibility as a leader to make the right decision, then I have everyone else's best interest in mind. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And the schools, excuse me, the schools that they're adopting many different ways to open up right now. And the ones that I think are the most effective are the leaders that have involved all their stakeholders in the discussion, including parents, especially parents. If the decision has been mandated above, we're going to open virtually or we're going to open face-to-face, we're cutting people out of the process. And many schools I'm aware of have not included teachers, they haven't included nurses in the discussion, and some haven't included parents. but I was reading something from one superintendent the other day where he was leaving a video message, and it was directed to his school community and his parents, because they allowed parents to decide whether they wanted their kids to learn virtually or in person or in hybrid. Now that it's very, very challenging to figure out how to do this, but he was allowing people to have input in the process because it's their kids' safety that's at stake versus him making a decision. And I have a wonderful story about a janitor if you want to hear it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
All right. So in the 1960s, early 1960s, when President Kennedy had announced that we were going to go to the moon, we were going to send men to the moon and bring them back safely. They set up a space center in Houston, Texas, and I believe this was in 1962. And he's touring this new space center in Texas, and he sees a janitor leaning on his broom as this whole entourage of Kennedy, and I think his wife was there, and all these other people, they're touring the center. But Kennedy sees this janitor kind of standing off to the side holding his broom. And Kennedy was a very warm human person. He walked over to the janitor and he said, "And what do you do here?" And the janitor looked at him and said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." Now that's an example of where purpose is infused in an organization. If that person got it, there was something special there.
That's empowering, because we normally look to, you mentioned earlier about in American business or American society, right? We look to leaders who are the ones with the most clout or socioeconomic prowess, right? And we have many different layers here that have built a society and a system that is probably not as inclusive, and where we don't feel like we belong as easily. I'm not saying that other societies have it better than us or less, but we've got a lot of work to do. You know, I think we can agree there. But it's about looking at everyone who is part of the organization. And while their contribution may not be the same, it needs to come from a place where they feel like they belong and that their contribution matters. And there's some sort of equanimity in that contribution, that, you know, certainly the CEO may be in a position where they're making more of the decisions, but they're also empowering others to be part of the decision making. So going over and asking, I think Kennedy knew what the janitor with the broom, the man with the broom, was doing, but it's really, I think it highlights just how good of a leader Kennedy was, but it also calls to the point that he was role modeling that this is how we include people. This is how we put a focus on everyone in the organization and their importance, and we don't classify them. You know, we don't say based on the role that you have, you are less or more important. And I think that's powerful, because as we teach children today about working, no job is above us or below us. But, you know, teach them to aspire, teach them to dream and to achieve, and then teach them to respect, because we learned something in COVID. The essential workers are the ones that we took for granted, the ones we never paid enough, and the ones that we didn't respect enough. And, with all due respect, would you want your child to be, someone who collects your garbage or to be the janitor at your school? If that's what my child wants to do and they believe they're making a difference, so be it. Do I want them to aspire to something different? Sure. But it's when we start aspiring to something more or better, that's where we start building the class, and we start looking at, leadership as a role. And now it's the layers of privilege, right? Let me ask you, you've got many examples I'm sure you can share, but we all have regrets and we've all made mistakes, hands down. Is there one particular mistake you've made that was a turning point in your life? Putting you on the spot here, huh?
Yeah. One mistake that was a turning point. I'm sure if I thought about it, I could come up with a number.
Then let me lead you in a different direction. because what I'm reading into your inability to answer that, if I may say, is because I think the way that you approach a mistake is not debilitating, right? If you can't think of just one mistake that really made that difference, then you probably have a way of dealing with mistakes that doesn't hold you back, that doesn't handicap you from moving forward. Can you tell me, to you, what does it mean to make a mistake or to fail?
So actually, when you were talking, a situation did come to mind, and it was a particular learning situation for me. When I was leading, at one point I was leading all of publishing, and I was working with the sales organization. This was a very large meeting. There were probably 20, 25 people in the meeting, and sales was pushing us to do something that had not been budgeted. And my response at the time was that this has not been budgeted, we can't do it. And the lesson that I learned from that was one of trade-offs, that if this is important, what are we willing to give up to get this? And so that would have been a way to involve sales in the decision-making process versus me just going, nope, we've only got this pool of money, it's all accounted for, we don't have any room for this, so we can't do it. And that was a lesson for me in integrating other people, other stakeholders into the process.
And so from the takeaway from there is involving others. It's allowing yourself to, again, it comes back to that vulnerability, right? You don't have to have all the answers.
Right. Now there is one thing I'd like to add to my earlier story when we were talking about David Marquet. And this is very germane to the whole idea of leader responsibility. A lot of people reject the idea of becoming the leader because they feel that they're going to be solely accountable for the decision. So if I'm willing to say, Mohammed, what do you think we should do here? And you come up with an idea, now all of a sudden they think they're solely responsible. So people, their fear makes them back away from that. The way Captain David Marquet, countered that was by having a discussion with people where they would say, here is what I intend to do because. So they're putting their rationale for the decision out there. They're giving Marquet a chance to have dialogue with them. And now we have joint accountability versus I'm going off and doing whatever I think I need to do. Now, obviously, you can't do that with every decision. You can do it with the ones that have critical implications, but it's a way to break down that fear of other people initially, that they're going to be solely accountable for whatever decision they make. No, I want you to have input here, but I want you to come back and say, Jeff, here's what I'm thinking of doing, and here's why. What do you think?
And is that what you talk about when you allude to the effectiveness of one's leadership owned by those being led? Are we talking about the same thing here?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, it's just what you want is for people to feel comfortable operating in a leader environment. You want them to feel comfortable with greater agency, if you will. And people naturally go into that situation and they're going to be fearful that they're going to be held accountable for every decision. And that's not going to lead to a productive work arrangement. They're not necessarily, some people won't necessarily buy into that. So one way to break down that barrier is, again, it does slow down the process because we're saying, what do you think we should do here? I think we should do this because. And now we've got to
slow down the process. Pay me now, pay me later. Right.
Exactly.
So, right.
Exactly.
So if we don't slow down the process to see if we're doing a better job at it or doing it better, then we're going to pay the price later. And some haste makes waste. So as they say.
Yeah.
So, this is where I get to the point of the interview where I ask you to share one thing with my listeners. It's called the Unfiltered Thought of the Week. So I say to you, Jeff, if you could give one piece of advice to help my listeners become better versions of themselves, better leaders, better people, better human beings, what would that piece of advice be?
So for leaders, I would say the minute you feel like speaking, pause. and see what question comes to mind as opposed to a statement. And that is tough, but pausing for me is a key in many areas of leadership. But we are so conditioned to offer the answer, to offer the advice. If you can just take that little pause and instead of a declarative statement, ask the question.
That's incredible. You know, seek to understand first, then to be understood, and pause because, you know, we often act out of impulse. I'm a very reactionary person. I'm very impulsive, and I'm not the most brief person. So, you know, one of the things that I work on regularly, daily, is pausing to listen, pausing to appreciate the silence and to appreciate the space where I can grow and have those options. And I want to thank you for, you know, encouraging us today to pause and to think about ways to grow, and that leaders are about giving options and creating space. So thank you for being my guest today.
I've enjoyed the conversation immensely.
Likewise. I could let this conversation go on for another hour, and hopefully this will give us an opportunity to come back in the future to continue to connect and to collaborate. Thank you, Jeff, for being an unfiltered leader, and stay safe, stay blessed, and thank you very much for being our guest today.
And back at you.
Take care. Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.